Well, greetings to my next installment of my Aletheia Dialogues with Whistleblowers. Today I have somebody with a story to tell which really gives a real visceral experience of what Aletheia means. Now, it's a Greek word which we normally translate as truth. It's also possible to translate it accurately and more accurately as reality. So we're going to get an insight today into the reality of whistleblowing and retaliation against whistleblowers in the corporate environment. Most of the respondents I've interviewed so far have been involved largely in state whistleblowing, and he will tell us how he came to find himself in this position of having to lock himself behind high walls in a secure complex, send his wife and child away into a deep rural area so that they wouldn't come to any harm. And when I first arrived with his lawyer, who took me to see him, very concerned about his state of mind and the anxiety that he was experiencing, before going upstairs into his apartment, he took us to see his car parked in the driveway. And in it is a round hole of a bullet that had penetrated the back of his car. Now, his name's Patrick Maduna, and it's now ready for him to reveal his story because his case is now, at last, before the courts. Patrick, tell us, how on earth did you get this bullet hole in the back of your car?
I decided to drive home at night at that particular point because I have had at least 2 incidents where there was an attempt. Out of nowhere, passing Rivonia on N1, then there was this car behind me shooting, but I sped off.
So were they out to kill you or just to intimidate you?
I'm not sure of that, but all I know is that they were out to get me.
It certainly signaled to me and got my attention. And I then sat you down, got more of your story, and just for the benefit of the listeners, Patrick was employed by a company called Lociware, having previously worked as a driver for Budget and Avis Rent-A-Car. And in 2016, there was a clever idea brought together by Shell and Barloworld to set up a BBBEE empowerment initiative to improve their BBBEE scorecard. Companies need to show themselves committed to dealing with socioeconomic inequalities and to empower people that have been historically disadvantaged. And we have something called broad-based black economic empowerment. And Shell and Barloworld had established this idea of forming a company that would have a trust, and the beneficiaries of the trust would be then employees of a company that was set up as a trading entity to basically bring people who are historically disadvantaged into the economy as owners of the business. So, Patrick, let's take up the story from the point at which you were sitting then as a trustee of Lociware and trying to exercise your fiduciary duty to ensure that there was transparency on financial matters. So give us the story.
So I was appointed by the employees of Lociware Pty to be a trustee and represent their interest. So one of the things is when you are representing employees, you have a fiduciary duty to ensure that the trust serves its purpose or objective. Amongst other things is that it was agreed that in 3 years we were going to declare dividends, which was in 2020 because we started trading in 2017. So when the time came, that didn't happen. I demanded audited financials from PTY. PTY could not provide that. I knew they were not there because I was in the EXCO at PTY level as well as a beneficiary and a trustee at the trust level. So when I demanded those financials, because remember, the employees who appointed me to become a trustee, then they were demanding answers from me to say, when are we getting our dividends? So in that regard, that is when I first realized that we didn't have audited finances, finance reports or records. I realized that there was a retaliation from the business at PTY level.
A retaliation
Against me.
You?
Yes, and anyone who was asking about financials. And it resulted to a lot of them being disciplined and fired for the fact that they were actually asking about finances. So
it looked to me that what was happening here was what we call a BEE fronting exercise. It gave benefit to the corporates to improve their BEE scorecard, which would have entitled them to have better access to government tenders and, the profitability of their business, because that's, we needed to incentivize corporates to actually try and bridge the huge inequalities we have. It looks to me like this Lociware Trust was like a pre-cooked meal. It was set up with one purpose, to bring benefit to the workers, and you then found yourself trying to exercise accountability to your people that elected you,
Absolutely.
to what you knew as a trustee,
Yes.
and you were being stonewalled.
Yep.
Were there other people in a similar position?
Yes, there was indeed other people who actually were in my position, who actually wanted answers, who wanted objectivity, and they were all met with retaliation. Amongst other things, we ended up employing the services of lawyers who eventually wrote to the BBBEE Commission after it was clear they demanded finances from Lociware. Lociware refused to provide those things. And eventually they wrote to the BBBEE Commission because it was clear that Shell has created a vehicle to defraud Shell using this vehicle, which is Lociware. And to date, the BBBEE Commission has never ever responded. They just said that they were still investigating.
So you made a disclosure to the BBBEE Commission, which is a state set up to basically ensure that these sorts of fronting exercises are exposed.
Absolutely.
They've done nothing about it. Is that what you say?
Yes, to date they've done nothing.
What other efforts did you make to try and bring awareness and to report the matter?
Feedback. Secondly, I made a protected disclosure at Shell global hotline platform, which is Shell Upstream. But they deployed someone to come and speak to me in South Africa. He's based in Nigeria. In South Africa, I spoke to high-profile managers
at the executive level of Shell.
High executive Shell managers here in Bryanston. I made a protected disclosure to them. I also made a protected disclosure to the Hawks. I went to the Hawks. I reported the matter. What is very surprising is that when I made a protected disclosure with the Hawks, and they opened the case, and then they informed Shell that the case has been opened, a week later, that is when my car was shot.
I see.
So after I received my case number, the next week there was an attempt on my head.
So it was not public knowledge that you'd gone to the Hawks.
Yes.
They had an obligation then to
disclose.
Notify suspects or people, stakeholders or persons of interest, and soon thereafter you got this attempted murder.
I could say that, yes.
And have you laid a charge for that attempted murder?
I did. I have a case number for that as well.
Okay.
And then a bullet landed inside the car, and it was taken by the Sentin police for ballistic testing and other things. So that was the fourth protected disclosure I did with the police. Then I also did a protected disclosure with the board, a Lociware board, because we then we formed a board, and then I made a disclosure to them, and then I took the board, Lociware board, to Shell to say they now need to collaborate to assist each other in providing evidence and investigating this matter, so that we have, the truth.
Well, there's so many interesting caveats, which unfortunately I have the benefit of knowing, having heard you tell the story, interviewed others. But we're going to not go into them now. We'll wait for the next episode. I want to just ask you, why did you do this? Tell us a bit about yourself and where you're coming from. Because you didn't wake up in the morning and decide that you were going to be a whistleblower.
Indeed, John. I was raised by my grandmother. My grandmother raised me in a religious way, and she's more traditional in how she did things. So traditions and culture actually molds our values as people. So I think in this regard, I found myself in a situation where it was like a rock and a rock. I was caught in between these two rocks, and unfortunately, I didn't even know that I was a whistleblower. I didn't even think that I was once going to be a whistleblower, but the situation actually dictated that by virtue of me questioning these things and me getting this pushback by the board of our company, the board of Shell, executives of Shell, and me questioning all these things and opening cases would actually lead me to being a whistleblower. It was just me doing what I needed to do. I had a fiduciary duty that I had to actually serve the company and ensure that everything is done accordingly. But unfortunately, I was working with people who actually had, different interests in mind, and it ended up to being what it is.
Because it seems a bit ironic, because in a normal company, if you don't report wrongdoing,
Absolutely.
you could end up being implicated and lose your job.
Absolutely.
And what actually happened? It seems the complete opposite. Because you reported wrongdoing, you were then targeted with retaliation. So tell us about, before they got to shooting at you, they, whoever they are, what was the first attempt for them to try and weed you out of the system?
So firstly, in 2019, they just reported that I was going to leave the company. It was around December and November. It was there's a staff meeting, and they said I'm leaving the company in December, which I didn't know. I had employees telling me, "Hey, Mr. Maduna, we wish you good luck in your future endeavors." I said, "What is that?" And actually, there was no case, nothing, and I kept quiet. In 2021, I wrote to the board because I demanded to know, the board of our company, I demanded to know what is actually happening in our company. We have not declared dividends. Nothing has actually happened. The board retaliated, and I was taken to disciplinary. I also wrote to the trustees, which was myself, a Shell representative, and our other trustees in the company, questioning that our former general manager and that Shell employee who was a trust representative on behalf of Shell attempted to appoint themselves as signatories of the trust without board resolutions. So when I came back from the Master of the High Court, I came back with a report that states that a board resolution from our company, and Shell needed to issue one as well, stating that they are appointing their own candidate to become a signatory to the trust, and us, our board, on the side. So when I came back and questioned that, that Shell representative person, who later resigned because of being investigated, resigned immediately to say no, because this just came out. She wants to resign, and even her resignation letter was drafted by our company. Our legal secretary was instructed to draft that letter, and it was sent to her. Only what she did, she put the Shell logo and said she's resigning.
So, is your grandmother still alive, by the way?
No, she passed. She passed in 2016, John. She was 80 years old.
Really?
Yes.
But there's a strange sense in which I think that she is still alive, because the values that she inculcated and brought you up with.
Yeah.
And reflect a bit about that. What's kept you going?
My grandmother, John, she was a very resilient person. She worked until she was 76. She was a helper. She always taught me that you need to be honest, confront the truth. It was all around the truth. you can never forget the truth, but with lies, it's always going to be the opposite. And you can never be accountable when you actually telling lies, but when you're telling the truth.
Tell the truth, because then you won't have to try and remember what you said.
Exactly.
Because you just tell it again. And you've had more than one occasion to have to do that, haven't you?
Yep.
Because they failed the first time round to weed you out.
Yes.
You won your case. You had to be reinstated. Eh?
I was reinstated and I was removed from the EXCO, and my legal team wrote to the company for me to be reinstated. They refused. They laid charges against me. Before the general manager could resign as well, after I won my case, they tried to lay another case, which they eventually laid again last year. They actually attempted to do that in 2022. Unfortunately, LabourNet requested that if they say I hacked into the company system, the system is only using Microsoft. So they must get a report from Microsoft.
Okay, so they were charging you for hacking into the company system and getting access to confidential information.
Yes. LabourNet said, okay, for us to charge him, get that report from Microsoft. So do you think Microsoft...
So there need to be some objective evaluation, and they can do it forensically to go and say, was the system hacked?
Indeed.
And LabourNet said, look, we can't have evidence to dismiss him until we see evidence that says, yes, it has been hacked.
Exactly.
And they never got that.
They never got that. I was actually told by the IT manager, who later passed on. He told me that this is what they tried to do, but they got negative results. So fast forward, after that, they brought the same charges last year. And then they pinned it on an audio where they say I saying Inkunzi Malanga. They translated Inkunzi Malanga into a hacker. But Inkunzi Malanga, it could be you. It can be Inkunzi Malanga and what you're doing. Someone who knows what he's doing. So
so they kind of contrived some sort of plausible suggestion that you were actually hacking into the system. I mean, when you told me that first time round, the first thought that occurred to me is that you had connected the dots. You didn't need to go and find the information there. And then suddenly they realized that somebody was connecting the dots. And they must have thought, sure, he must have access to some confidential information.
Exactly, George. There's a guy from Cape Town whom I will name, who was the general manager. I'll name him later as we proceed with the other episodes. He said, there is no way I can have possession of all this information because I don't have access to that information. The only way I could have had that access is I would have hacked into the system.
What they should have done is just gone and got that report and said, hey, there you go. Somebody's hacked into it. Was it you? Subject you to a lie detector.
Yes.
But they then retrospectively try to actually retrofit a case against you. And of course, LabourNet said, no, we're not pursuing this thing. We're finding him not guilty. Go back to work.
What happened is in 2019, where we had to do a budget, we had to do a financial budget for the year, I requested for audited financials for 2018 and 2017 so that we can see where we did better and where we did bad, so that we can actually know this is where we need to polish ourselves and this is how we need to conduct ourselves for the year. But there was none. The former general manager told me that he didn't owe me that report. It is actually given to the chairperson of Shell. So then I also saw from there to say, okay, this is like a pushback. What is it that they are hiding that I should not see in financials that needs to be seen by a selected few? Then I was not participating in fully in financials, in fairness, in seeing every company documentations. I was sidelined in there. So I realized there's a problem. Then I said, where there's smoke, there's fire.
There's fire, yes. Well, we'll leave it to the investigative journalists and to this Hawks and everyone else to get down to those issues. And just to kind of draw this first installment of the saga to some sort of conclusion, what sounds to me that you experienced, which is very common with all the other whistleblowers that I've interviewed who have been on my YouTube channel and the ones who have not yet gone public, is that there is the abuse of the labor law protocols and rules as a deliberate way of working you out of the system because of the unequal power relationship that exists, that they feel that they can control the process, and they basically manipulate the whole Labour Relations Act in devious ways to basically put you under pressure. Is that what's happened?
Yeah, that's what happened, John. But one mistake they did is that, you remember, like when we all started, we all migrated from Avis to join this ship. They assumed that we are a bunch of illiterates who will be just pushed into this, and then they will dictate what needs to be done, and we would never question. How dare we do that? So unfortunately, I'm not one of those. I questioned, and where I sought to get legal representation or employ the services of an expert, I did so. So which is why I am where I am today, and I ended up being a whistleblower, because then I had a better insight and understanding of everything that actually had occurred.
And how do you feel about the title whistleblower?
I don't like it. I don't like it, John. I don't like the whistleblower title, because it is, traditionally in our cultures, in our black culture, if I may put it, it's attached with snitching. It's like you're a snitch. Yeah. So in this regard, I never woke up wanting to be a whistleblower, but I found myself in a situation where I was doing my due diligence, which resulted in me being on a hot seat, which is being a whistleblower. I was just doing my job. So even with other people in the corporate environment, I would encourage them to do what they do best. Just do your job. If it lands you on a seat where you are called a whistleblower, then so be it. But we don't wake up wanting to be that. But yes.
So the difference, and which is really why I do this work, and I just find it so extraordinarily unjust, that ordinary people like you are just good, conscientious employees should be subjected to this terrible pathology and contagion of corruption, is that as a social worker, I knew that I would be under scrutiny, and as people will know, that I've been the target of a slap suit, as they call it, strategic litigation against public participation, just for doing my job. But I was ready for it. I knew that this could be the case, and I knew the law and all the rest, to the point now with that particular case, we've won a constitutional court ruling that outlaws what are known as slap suits. What you experience is what I call slow suits, strategic litigation on whistleblowers. And it's so much more painful for you because you don't know where to turn to. You find yourself in a kind of a complete state of depression, of despair. You've got a child to support, you're wanting to do the ethical thing, and yet you're being put, as you say, between a rock and a hard place. Suddenly you no longer have a job, suddenly you're back at home. Your wife and darling little boy who I've met, who every time I arrive thinks it's Father Christmas. But you're now all alone. You can't ride your bicycle with your friends, as you were a great cyclist. You're having to basically isolate yourself so as to avoid being killed. Tell me, share with people how you got through that deep, dark night that you went through, because I'm wanting other folk to know that it ultimately is actually the right thing to do and to stand your ground.
So I have other two kids, a boy who is 12, a girl who is 10, then my youngest son. And then I think when this blew out, my wife had to go and stay in the Western Cape in the rural areas, and I actually had to cut ties. I stopped going to see my son, seeing my daughter, and then financially as well. It was a huge strain, and I was isolated. I had to stay alone because we didn't know what was going to happen, and I had the reserves, but unfortunately they couldn't sustain me. So financially that burden was severe, and I took a lot of blows when it comes to that. It got to a point where I could not even cycle. Actually stopped cycling quite a long time before they even dismissed me, after I took a shot, that bullet in the car, because I felt like I was going to put this other cyclists' lives in danger. Because what happens if these guys, try to shoot me and they miss me, they shoot the other guy. When I did the risk assessment, I realized that no, I'd rather stay at home than being on the road with these folks, because I am now a hazard.
You're putting them at risk, yes.
Exactly. And around that particular point, there was a guy that was bumped by a Porsche Cayenne. It was driven by someone who was drunk. It also dawned on me to say, oh, these guys, if they want me, they also can get someone to come and bump me. And bump maybe the entire group just to target me then. So one of the things that I didn't mention is that last year I was driving a company car at night. As I stated, that I prefer to drive at night so that I can see who is following me and who is in my surroundings. I was driving a company car. I was just driving between 60 and 70 on Grosvenor, going home from Bryanston. And then there's a truck that came out of nowhere and came and bumped the car. I was driving just above 60, less than 70, but the car was right off. The truck came straight to me. So I'm connecting the dots. I'm thinking, maybe what if the truck was actually sent to me because I was already a target? It was a write-off just on Grosvenor. So I've had, emotionally, I've suffered, John. I will really, really, really like to thank you as well, because you came to my rescue. You coming to my house and telling me that I'm not alone. You brought whistleblowers to my house, people who came and told me their stories. I googled these people, I read their stories, you sent me links. I saw some of them speaking on national media, and those, I was like, I'm not alone. It's not the first time. This is not an isolated incident. This happens. It gave me that comfort, and you came to check on me on weekly.
All I did was bring a whole bunch of books and people. I wish I could have brought some magic wand that made the problems go away. And I was so impressed when I brought you the pile of books of Cynthia Stimple's books and Musila Motepo's and Temba Maseko's and all these books, that you just devoured them in no time. But of course, you were all alone. And
I think apart from me meeting the people, also reading the books of the people I've never met, people who state categorically what happened to them, the victimization, the financial suffering, the emotional sufferings. Actually, it was more detailed in the books. So it was also another therapy to me to say, no, this is not unique. And you even said it to me the first day you met me. You said, listen, Patrick, it's only going to be worse. Every time we meet, you must know that it is actually going to be worse.
Which of course was a lesson for me, because initially I wanted to kind of make things better and sort of calm the waters, but as I got more into it myself, it was quite hair-raising. And the question then became for me is not saying, well, what is necessary to ensure that when things get worse, you're going to go through it? Rather than say, we're here to make things comfortable for you and to basically put airbags all around you to cushion you from reality. Aletheia means reality.
True.
It means going and shedding the illusions and the self-deception. The payback for me is that I have found, working with people without power, who aren't comforted and cosseted and protected by staff and whatever, that you see reality so much more vividly. And initially it's shockingly frightening. But as your eyes adjust to the darkness, you start seeing that there are things there that you wouldn't see when you're on high, in a position of power, when you've been fed propaganda by your minions around you. You won't see that. The biblical notion of the truth will set you free. It's that reality that sets you free.
Yes.
That really dark night of the soul experience that people go through. So I felt I had to be honest with you and say, look, Patrick, I'm not here to kind of reassure you.
Yes.
I'm here to say, have you got your ducks in a row? What can you do? And also to hopefully show a little bit my own life story. It's becoming true.
Yes.
It took a lot longer than I thought it would, but it is becoming true. And as I'm telling you this, I'm saying this because this morning another one of my whistleblower clients phoned me and he said, John, please try and mediate for us. My son is about to be excluded from his school because we can't pay his school fees. My daughter has been withheld her results from university because we can't pay university fees. Why? Because his wife was basically, same experience, a slow suit, strategic litigation on her, excluded, fired from the company, even though the company has already realized that she was telling the truth, fired the CEO that was responsible. But yet she's still out in the cold, still waiting to get her job back so she can keep her kids in school. Yeah. And so I'm basically sharing that because your story and their story is probably not initially going to endear people to wanting to go and start making protected disclosures. But I'm sharing it with you because my satisfaction as a social worker after 40 years in seeing people like you who just hold on and don't give up is what really means that's the salvation of this country.
You know, John Evans said that there's a lady who worked for Shell who actually first brought, who questioned how we did business with Shell, who questioned how we billed Shell, our invoices. She was never protected by Shell. She ended up leaving the employment at Shell because she was then harassed by her line manager. Instead of the business, she even reported to Shell as a business. Instead of Shell, protecting her and realizing that she is actually protecting Shell as a business from being defrauded by its own employees and outsiders. They tend a blind eye. What I'm trying to say is, like you just mentioned the story, is those who are in power, they are entrusted with building and creating controls in the business. So with those controls that they are building or that they are creating, they also know where the loopholes are and they manipulate them. So the people who are the real corrupt in the corporate platform, it's the executives, because they make those controls, they make those decisions. As and when it suits them, they can tweak and turn it. But for those who are middle managers and just junior managers, it's
well, I know that there's a generalization that you make in the end. Of course, if you look back in history, what did Lord Acton say? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why you have checks and balances. That's why you have a Companies Act, a deeds of trust, fiduciary duties, court cases, and all the rest to say these have to be in place. But they still have the power to game it so that it still brings them out on top. However, the reason I have confidence and hope for the future is that power has no defense against the truth.
Absolutely.
And what the effect of having you meet up with my other whistleblower friends and read their stories, you suddenly create the solidarity and you realize you're not alone.
Absolutely.
And that in fact, it does scare the people who are corrupt, who have power, because they don't have a defense against it. So what do? They retaliate against you. Absolutely. They kill you. They do all those, the dreadful things. But it still doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Because you can't put a lid on truth. I mean, I'm saying this as a man who's 67 now. He's lived his life. And I used to be kind of quite nuanced about saying that. But as I've got older and heard more and more stories, I can be more emphatic about it. That far better that you embrace the truth and you seek the truth and you reconcile yourself to the truth than be in denial about it.
Yes.
You will always come out better in the long run if the truth matters to you, even though you might not have a full sense of the truth. But that's why we have the courts of law to test different versions of the truth. That's why we check each other out. That's why we share each other's burdens so that we can help each other deal with the blind spots so that we're not seeing. And I'm asking you if you can testify to this yourself. I mean, your situation is not ended yet. You've now just started the court process. But I'm wanting to say that in the court of public opinion, I've met a guy has stood his ground against all odds. And how are you feeling now about what's lying ahead for you?
To be honest, John, I realized that it doesn't matter how much power other people have, and at the end of the day, they are not invincible. There will be accountability. That gives me at least that comfort to say the road ahead, yes, it's going to be a little bit longer, it's going to be a little bit tougher, but it's worth it. That's how I feel.
Yes. Yeah, good. Well, for those watching, I hope this has been encouraging to you. We're not all called to be whistleblowers, but we prefer to use the term witness bearers. It's still the same acronym, WB, because within our whistleblower support groupings and our solidarity networks, we can bear witness to both the good and the bad. And I can count myself a witness bearer for the incredible blessing it's been to be able to bear witness to hearing people like Patrick, hearing all the others folks who are on my YouTube channel. If you just watched my YouTube channel, there's a whole playlist of, I think I've got about 16 at the moment, each telling their particular story. And what's really become so interesting to me is that there's my story, and then there's the cosmic egg expands, and you start thinking, oh, my story is not just about me, it's our story. And that gives you a sense of confidence to say, hey, I'm part of something that's larger than just me. And now it helps you correct and refine and test your own assumptions and develop more wisdom, because wisdom isn't learning something new every day, it's unlearning assumptions that you made that weren't true. And then, and I'm now seeing that within South Africa, we are addressing the national story, our story as a country. And the whistleblower narrative is such a powerful one. And I'm so grateful to the journalists, particularly Mandy Wiener, because her book, Whistleblowers, got me into this. She's now just republished it, by the way, in a second edition, which she's expanded it and elaborated. Mandy, you've got another story to tell in the next one. And I'm really also wanting to say to the journalist friends who've been so helpful, they have been able to ensure that I can stay in my lane and help them stay in their lanes, as well as then with the lawyers that we've worked with, that they can also then apply their minds to the law and to outwit and outsmart those who think they've gamed the system. Our labour relations legislation is pretty good. You know, our constitution is pretty good. We've got the legal frameworks. It just needs really good law to actually ensure that it happens. We also now have a media which has now got its space widened since the Constitutional Court judgment on the Mineral Sands project, which I was involved with, where we've now basically outlawed slapsuits. And we've seen lawyers using, to very great effect, to challenge firstly Jacob Zuma, for who basically tried a slap attack on Karen Moore, who's a journalist, and then more recently against the Moti group, who were trying to intimidate Amabungani. So my sense is that with these things now happening and moving up from the foundations of civil society, with truth being our guide and our compass, the future is bright.